jet crashes on a Scottish village. Eyewitnesses describe an explosion and a 300-foot fireball. Houses and cars are set on fire by burning debris. In London, police hunt 2 men after finding an IRA bomb factory, and a mother and stepfather get 12 years for killing little Doreen. Good evening. A Pan Am jumbo jet with 258 people on board has crashed tonight just north of the Scottish border. The plane disappeared off radar screens at 19 minutes past 7. Eyewitnesses said they heard a rumbling and then a terrible explosion. The plane hit a petrol station and nearby houses. Police have closed the A74, the main road between Scotland and England. Vehicles and houses are on fire. Pan Am Flight 103 took off from Heathrow at 6:25 this evening, 25 minutes late. It was bound for John F. Kennedy Airport in New York. Radio contact was lost when the plane was at 31,000 feet. It crashed near the centre of Lockerbie. A spokesman at Dumfries Royal Infirmary said they had received only a very small number of casualties. Geoffrey Archer has been looking at the first pictures we've received.
The first pictures from the devastated town of Lockerbie show a string of houses set ablaze by the jet as it exploded in flames. The Pan Am Jumbo had been following its normal flight path north over Scotland. There were no signs of any problems with the flight. The last radio contact with the plane was at 15 minutes past 7. Then radar screens lost contact and it crashed with devastating force into the small town. Eyewitnesses said it made a massive crater next to a main road. It seems that all 258 people on board were killed, but it's not known how many casualties there are on the ground. People in the town talked of what they'd seen.
Just seen a big streaky light, and then there's a big explosion. Well, we can't see Lockerbie for the house, but the hill bit just massive, like.
We can't get any closer than here because we just got hunted with that police along the road there. Bloody hell, it's the mother and father.
In the streets of Lockerbie, small pieces of wreckage were scattered, indicating the force of the explosion that ripped the plane to pieces. There are no reports that the pilot of the aircraft sent any messages reporting that he was in difficulty. This suggests that whatever disaster befell the jumbo jet happened very quickly indeed. Once the tragic task of dealing with the dead and injured has been completed, accident investigators will search for the 2 flight recorders which would have been on board. One of those records the voices of the cockpit crew, the other a whole range of technical data. The investigators will want to see if there was any evidence of a sudden cabin depressurization that could be caused by a massive technical failure or by a bomb explosion.
Well, a few moments ago, one eyewitness described the scene to IRN. We'll get to that in just a moment. It's been announced that there will be a statement in the House of Commons in about 10 minutes' time. Now, Ian Fisher from Border Television is at Lockerbie. Ian, can you tell us what the latest situation is?
Well, as you can imagine, the situation in Lockerbie at the moment is very, very confused. Dozens of houses are burning, and the fire brigade are being hampered in their attempts to put out the fires by the risk of a further explosion from the petrol station, which the Pan Am Jumbo hit as it crashed into the town. It's not clear just how many are dead on the ground. The local medical officer has said that there are unlikely to be a great number of casualties. It's thought that most of those who have been affected by the crash on the ground will have died. But within the last half hour, around 12 people suffering from severe body burns have arrived at the Dumfries Infirmary. A huge area of the town has been evacuated, and hundreds of people are pouring into the area from neighbouring towns and villages trying to find out information about friends and relations. The police have closed off the main link between Scotland and England on the west coast, the A74, and 2 RAF search and rescue helicopters are at the moment investigating whether or not a second aircraft was involved in this incident. A number of people on the ground in Lockerbie reported seeing a second aircraft come down, and we are at the moment checking out that position. As I say, the first casualties have now arrived at Dumfries Infirmary. There's been a mass exodus of people from the town. They're now being put up in local pubs and being looked after there.
Ian, can you give us some clearer idea of the scale of damage done to the town of Lockerbie itself? How many houses, the petrol station? What's actually been done to the town?
The south side of the town, near to the main road, has been wiped out. Houses have been gutted. There are just very small parts of aircraft now lying around on the street, and there is a huge pall of smoke hanging over the sky, which is lit from the burning houses below. Many of the people are in shock. Many were unhappy at seeing people from the media around and tried to get us to leave. The fire brigades have a very, very difficult task ahead of them. As we left to come to a phone box to report to you, fire engines and ambulances were still rushing to the scene from the north and south. They're being hampered in their approaches by the heavy load of traffic which has been stopped on the main road. And that at the moment is something of a severe problem for the police.
Ian, thanks very much indeed, but call us again when you have more. Thank you very much indeed. That's Ian Fisher in Lockerbie. Sandy.
A few minutes ago, one eyewitness described the scene to Independent Radio News.
The sky lit up, and the first thing I thought about was a plane, because it was obviously gasoline of some sort, an almighty roar. And then as I cut further down the road, come round the bend about another 3/4 of a mile, the whole road was, there's vehicles on the road ablaze, 2 houses ablaze, and the road's completely covered with masonry, beds, garden gates. The people in the houses wouldn't have any chance of getting out.
Air Vice Marshal David Brooke, in charge of coordinating the RAF rescue services, told Phil Roman how they were hoping.
We've got on the way to the scene 9 search and rescue helicopters and 2 Chinook helicopters, and they are just now assessing what's best to do, and they're arriving in the next hour. It appears that it struck once and bounced, and I understand that it's a site to the southwest of Lockerbie.
Do you know if there are any survivors?
No, I don't.
So what's your plan now?
Well, it's a question of getting enough medical assistance and manpower to the scene to do whatever is required. But the last we heard, there was a serious fire there, and it was difficult to actually get anywhere near the question of life-saving.
Ray Shillingworth of the AA, one of whose patrolmen witnessed the disaster, told ITN what they knew.
Well, so far the information we have is that the emergency services across are on the scene. The police are coordinating it. We had many patrols in the area working. At the moment, I've got around 16 staff in the area, but when they're assisting the police, diverting traffic and keeping the traffic moving and keeping it away from the area. One of the big problems at the moment seems to be that we're getting a lot of people going down there sightseeing.
Our reporter Lindsay Taylor has been looking at the safety record of the Boeing 747.
The Boeing 747, manufactured in Seattle, is the workhorse of the world's major airlines. It has a reputation as one of the safest passenger aircraft currently in use. But there are a number of aging planes still in use, and there have been problems. 2 years ago, the Federal Aviation Authority in America ordered checks to be carried out after cracks were found in the nose section of some aircraft. Further checks were carried out as a precaution in other parts of the aircraft. Boeing too ordered an inquiry, and some cracks were found.
Well, the potential danger would be that the frame cracking through the pressure cycles that the aircraft goes through normally as it rises and comes down again from high altitudes, that it would pierce the fuselage and the skin, and therefore you would lose pressure while you're in the air and cause, a catastrophic problem.
During this time, cracks were also discovered in a small number of British Airways jumbos. They were all thoroughly checked, and in common with other airlines, improved testing techniques were introduced, and the aircraft were given a clean bill of health. There is, and it must be stressed, no indication that any such problem occurred or was responsible for tonight's disaster. And tonight, Craig Martin, Boeing's Director of Public Relations in Seattle, had this to say.
The 747 has a superb record of both safety and reliability. It's essentially the flagship of the free world's international airline fleet. There have been some occasions when there were things that needed to be looked at. In the case of the 747, there was some investigation of the nose section where some cracking was found, but that problem has been repaired by the airlines. There's no reason, again, there is no reason to make any guesses as to what may have occurred with this flight.
Tonight, Boeing's on its way to Dumfriesshire to assist in the inquiry. It could be weeks, they say, before any firm conclusions can be reached. At the moment, no one at Boeing's foreseeing any need to ground aircraft owned by Pan Am or indeed any other airline.
We're going over live now to Washington and Tim Ewart. Tim, what are the Pan Am people saying with you?
Not a great deal at this stage, Sandy. The information that is coming out of here is mostly coming from London, what little of it there is at this end. Some figures have come out from Pan Am headquarters a short while ago about the number of people on the aircraft. They're saying 255 on board, 240 of whom were passengers and 15 were crew. That conflicts with figures that have been put out by the Federal Aviation Authority here. They say there were 244 on board in total, 229 passengers, of which 3 were infants. But really everybody here is very, very anxious indeed for whatever information they can find. The US networks have been going live now since first news of the crash came through, but their information is mainly coming from your end.
Do you know whether they're mainly Americans on board, or have those figures not come out yet?
There's no information at all. Obviously, one of the first questions that was asked here was how many Americans, how many others were on board. The answer is there were some Americans on board, but there's no way at this stage from this end of telling what that figure might be.
And no suggestion as to what might have gone wrong?
Absolutely nothing. As I say, the information that we're getting from here so far is coming from you. ITN has been quoted extensively, of course. In fact, one of the cable stations has just now been taking our program live. So they're still looking to Britain for the information.
Tim, thank you very much. Alistair?
Well, looking for more information, John Snow has been examining the history of aviation history. He brings us this report now.
The condition of the Pan Am Jumbo's airframe is bound to be one major priority on the crash investigators' list as they rake through tonight's wreckage. Until 3 years ago, no civilian Boeing 747 had ever fallen from the sky, but then came the devastating loss of a Japan Airlines Jumbo in 1985. Investigators then concluded that a critical bulkhead had collapsed, rendering the plane uncontrollable. More than 500 people died in the ensuing crash. It resulted in a massive review of airframe safety, modifications and new regulations for the older Jumbos still flying. Only in one other incident did a 747 crash whilst flying. It was also in 1985 when an Air India Jumbo crashed into the sea off Ireland and 329 people died. Here, investigators concluded that it was the result of a bomb going off in mid-air. The plane's airframe worthiness was never in question. Until tonight, British skies, despite the dire warnings, have witnessed only 3 major air crash disasters in the past 21 years. Stockport in 1967, in which a plane crashed into a built-up area, 73 people died. Staines near Heathrow in 72, when 118 people were killed aboard a BEA flight. Pilot error was blamed then. And most recently on the ground in Manchester in 1985, in which 54 people died. Here the accident was blamed on a 1 in a million failure in an engine. Investigators are therefore confronted tonight with a country that has rarely seen a major air crash on its territory and an aeroplane that has only once before fallen from the sky as a result of anything other than a bomb attack aboard.
We're going over now to Vernon Mann, who's at Heathrow Airport. Here's his report.
What's happening here at Heathrow is that people are beginning to gather at the British Airways Epic Centre at their headquarters in the Queen's Building here. That's the Emergency Procedures Information Centre, part of the Crisis Management Centre. There are police here, Pan Am officials. There's a passenger list downstairs. A call went out a while back for German speakers. Lots of people volunteered, including staff from Lufthansa. There are check-in clerks here. No shortage of volunteers from all over the airport as word spread of the disaster. There are banks of telephones here to handle inquiries from friends or relatives of anyone who might have been on the plane, and they're preparing for a very long night. Vernon Mann, News at 10 at Heathrow.
The studio again, and he has the latest information about the crash.
Well, there are no new pictures from the scene at the moment, but latest reports from eyewitnesses suggest that there may have been 2 balls of fire, one perhaps from the main part of the wreckage falling into the town, and there appears to have been another fireball which might have fallen a few miles away. The suggestion could be that the plane exploded high up in mid-air, and then the wreckage was scattered over a very wide area. Ambulances and rescue teams have been brought from as far away as Glasgow to the area. A special emergency medical team is being helicoptered in from Glasgow. A hospital spokesman said that 2 hours after the crash, very, very few casualties had been emerging from the scene. And now back to Alistair Stewart.
Thanks, Jeff. Well, ITN's reporter Mark Webster is now in Lockerbie. Mark, Jeff Archer was just saying that the indications are of very few survivors. What's the latest impression you get in Lockerbie?
There are appalling scenes of damage here, Alistair. All around me I can see considerable amounts of wreckage. Just a few feet away, a large piece from the plane is still smouldering very brightly. There's a strong smell of burning. I can see a number of houses burning off in the distance. It could be 7 or 8. There are a whole string of ambulances and emergency services carrying the dead and injured away, but the damage really has been very extensive indeed.
From 2 sources now, there are suggestions, and I stress only suggestions at the moment, that there may have been 2 explosions, possibly even 2 aircraft. Do you have anything on that from the rescue services or anyone in authority there?
All they can reflect is the state of total confusion at the moment, I'm afraid. They're certainly very worried about what might have happened in the village of Langholm, about 3 miles from where I'm standing now. In the village of Langholm, they believe very extensive damage was done, where perhaps the bulk of the aircraft may have crashed.
What arrangements are being made for those who have survived? Because obviously the town of Lockerbie, as we heard from Ian Fraser earlier, or part of it, is devastated. What's being done to help those who have survived this tragedy?
There's an enormous effort being made here by the rescue services. There are dozens of ambulances carrying people away to the hospital in Dumfries. There's also a regular supply of helicopters which are carrying the worst of the injured away. And there's a lot of heavy lifting gear now arriving in town, which is obviously going to try and clear as much of the wreckage as possible. But there is really an extraordinarily large effort being made.
And finally, the last word that we had from Dumfries and Galloway Infirmary was that they were not expecting very many casualties. What does that tell us simply, Mark?
Judging simply, Alistair, by what I can see here on the ground, there's very little hope, I would have thought, for anybody who was in that plane. The extent of the initial hole carved in the ground by that plane is really very large indeed. When it did come to earth, as people have described locally, with an enormous flash of flame, it hit very hard.
Mark Webster, thank you very much for joining us. Sandy.
We'll, of course, keep you informed with the latest news as we get it from Scotland. Now, in London, the mother and stepfather of baby Doreen Aston have been jailed for 12 years for battering her to death. Christine Mason and Roy Aston were found guilty of manslaughter but not guilty of murder. Glenn O'Glaser reports.
Roy Aston showed no emotion as the jury returned their verdict after over 12 hours of deliberation. But Christine Mason struggled with her guards as she was led from the court, crying hysterically and screaming abuse. Passing sentence, Mr. Justice Michael Turner said their cruelty and neglect of Doreen had assumed horrifying, shocking and almost unbelievable proportions. He added violence begets violence, intolerance, degradation and ultimately depravity. The judge also referred to the role of social services in this case. He said it was a matter of public concern that given that the child was classified as at risk even before she was born, there'd been no effective contact between the social services and the family until it was too late. He said there is a public expectation of some explanation for such an apparent failure.
Police forces throughout the country are searching for 2 armed and dangerous terrorists tonight after detectives found an IRA bomb factory in South London. 150 pounds of Semtex explosives, machine guns, Armalite rifles and a Kalashnikov were discovered in a flat in Clapham. A senior police officer said the men were in the process of making bombs. Some could have been planted and the public's been warned to be on its guard.
It was just after midnight when a man suspected of being an opportunist car thief started the sequence of events which was to lead to the huge haul of arms and explosives here in South London. Police believed the man was trying to break into this car parked outside a block of flats when he disturbed a gunman sleeping inside. The gunman opened fire, wounding him in the stomach before running into the building where he alerted a colleague. They then disappeared. Residents called the police. Armed officers sealed off the block and eventually forced their way into the flat. Inside, they found around 150 pounds of Semtex explosives, like this, the sort used by the IRA in much of their recent European bombing campaign. Also rifles and machine guns.
The neighbour downstairs came home at 20 to 1, parked his car opposite the flats. And as he got out of the car, there was an argument between two geezers. And He went to lock his car, and as he looked up, he thought the geezer was actually breaking into the car, but he put his fist through the window. Having done that, the other guy stepped back, and the bloke inside the car turned around and shot him.
This woman lived above the bomb factory and saw one man using the flat recently.
Because I really thought the flat was empty. I didn't think there was anyone there. I had seen a light in it occasionally, but I thought it was someone viewing it or something, you know, until I saw him go in, and the only thing that came into my mind, oh, a new tenant.
Anti-terrorist squad officers and their forensic counterparts spent all night and much of the day at the flat. By now they had targeted 2 people. This is one man they want to trace, who uses 2 names, either Jim Errington or I.P. Flynn. They're also examining a Red Rover motor car, in which the men are believed to have escaped. It was later found abandoned a few miles west of London. Police warned the public not to approach these men.
The individuals concerned are very likely to be armed and certainly will be dangerous.
Police admit there was a significant amount of luck involved in today's find, but at the same time officers are delighted that the material for what could very well have been a major bombing campaign here is now under lock and key. Robin White, News at 10, South London.
Given 2 weeks before the Lockerbie air crash about a plot to bomb a Pan Am flight from Frankfurt. American embassies, foreign governments and